Okay, this is the third poem that we're covering in our Power and Conflict Poetry anthology. So it's called Storm on the Island, and it's by a poet called Seamus Heaney. Again, I recommend that you do this in 2 sessions, just to break it up. It should take you about 2 hours to complete all of the tasks. So this is the only part of the only work that you will have for English for this week. So please do your best to do the tasks as well as you can. That will help you to remember and try to understand the poem as much as possible. So what I'd like you to do is write today's date, write down the title, which is Storm on the Island, and underneath write predictions. Then I'd like you to carry out the 3 tasks. So the first one is to highlight 2 of the key words in the title and explore their connotations. So we're thinking about what we're supposed to think or feel or imagine when we read the title. Think about what kind of poem you think this is going to be about based on those key words. Try to come up with at least 3 for each of the words that you choose. And then the second one is explain why you think the title says the island instead of an island. How does it make that feel different to say the island rather than an island? What's the difference between the and an? The third one is now summarize your predictions notes into 3 words. So these words should be what you think the big ideas that will be discussed in this poem. Okay, so it's all about looking at the language. What do you think this poem is going to be about? How does the title help you to kind of understand or anticipate what this poem is going to be about and what the big ideas are? Thinking about context here, it's really important that you understand context, and that way you understand the poet's intentions, which is really an important part of your paragraphs to write about. Now, I don't expect you to write this all down word for word, but it's really important that you pick out the key points and put your notes into your own words. So, Seamus Heaney was born in the 1930s, going into 1940, and he grew up on a farm. So he is comes from a very rural community in Northern Ireland, and many of his poems are influenced by the lifestyles and the traditions of that countryside kind of rural upbringing. He did live in Dublin, which is the main city of Ireland, until his death, and he was one of Ireland's most celebrated poets. Now, this poem, Storm on the Island, was published in his first book, Death of the Naturalist, in 1966, and that did contain a lot of the kind of rural stuff, but importantly, it was a time where his poems really explored Ireland's troubles and the political battles that were going on. So there's 2 ways that you can interpret this poem. The first one is you can interpret it as a political poem, or you can take it as a poem about nature and the power of nature. So firstly, looking at it from a political point of view, the title Storm on the Island, if you take the first few letters, it makes Stormont. And Stormont is the name of the Northern Ireland kind of seat of government, the equivalent to our Houses of Parliament in the UK. So, and Ireland is a homophone for Ireland, the country. So there's definite basis that you could argue this is a political poem that's been written in a really kind of abstract way. So it could be the storm being a metaphorical storm, a political storm that explores the Northern Ireland troubles, and that was really kind of raging all through the 70s and the 80s. So the troubles in Northern Ireland, you can look this up if you're interested, if you want a bit kind of deeper understanding of it. But essentially, it's a violent conflict that went from kind of 1968. So the war is kind of brewing. This conflict is brewing at the time that Heaney's writing this. So there would have been a lot of political discussion around about the fact that Northern Ireland itself was kind of experiencing this civil war. There were Protestants who were loyalists, who wanted Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom. And then there were Roman Catholic nationalists who wanted Northern Ireland to become a part of the Republic of Ireland. So all of this would have been kind of brewing and leading up to this violent conflict around about the time that Heaney is writing this poem. So that's it in terms of a political interpretation, if you're looking at context. And if you're thinking about a literal interpretation, this poem absolutely works on a more literal level. A depiction of a storm, a fierce, kind of chaotic, violent storm that attacks a very isolated island. And we see a lot of this idea about Mother Nature versus human power and the human spirit. So it's important that you know he's from Northern Ireland. You know that if you're looking at this from a political interpretation, that Stormont is is essentially like the Houses of Parliament for the UK, that the homophone island is translated to Ireland, the country, and there was the brewing of the Northern Ireland Troubles. And if you're looking at this literally, it's important that you know that he had a countryside upbringing. He was brought up in a rural area. So as we start reading the poem, you will see why that becomes important. Okay, essentially on the face of it, this poem is about an islander who's talking to a visitor to the island. He's definitely not part of the community, about how the community prepares for these violent storms that ravage the island. And it seems like these storms are quite regular, so the islanders are quite used to it. And the island landscape is described as being really inhospitable. It's bleak, it's exposed to the wind and the rain, and therefore the intensity and violence that the storm brings. If you consider it from a political point of view, it's been speculated that this is a political poem, and the air, this huge nothing, this wind of the storm is nothing but hot air that's coming out of politicians' mouths, where lots and lots is discussed, but nothing is done. There is no action taken, and so all the islanders can do is just brace themselves for what is about to come, because they can see this storm coming, they can see this trouble brewing, and they can see how it's going to turn into war, but there's nothing that they can do about it because the politicians don't seem to be able to come to any kind of peaceful resolution. There is no action. So I'd like you to listen to the poem being read in full. Apologies that this clip doesn't have a series of pictures to accompany it like the others do, but I found one that is read by a famous Irish actor, so at least you get an authentic accent. Okay, make sure you have your anthology ready for your annotations. In terms of the title, we've talked about the title enough, so we're going to get straight into the poem itself. So, we are prepared. The speaker there is talking collectively. It's a collective pronoun, we. So this is that idea of linking it to a community, and a community who is together. They're solid. They are all working for each other. We built our houses squat. So a squat is kind of squashed down, small. And that kind of language is quite rough and rural. So it gives it a very agricultural tone. Remember, linking back to context and where and how Seamus Heaney grew up. It also gives it a more authentic voice. If he was very articulate, using very high-level, sophisticated terms, it wouldn't sound like you're talking to a community of rural people. We sink walls in rock and roof, and roof them with good slate. So that alliterative rock and roof really kind of shows that they are tough people. That alliterative makes it sound quite tough. They are talking about rock, so they are solid people that are linked to the land. They are not going to be put off. They are not going to be easily moved, even with this storm that's approaching. So this wizened earth. So wizened means a kind of shriveled with age, but it also is a very positive term. So it personifies the earth. It's a wizened earth, like almost like it's an old friend. They are tied, as agricultural kind of people would be, to the earth. So the weather is also treated like a friend through the use of the word company later on. So we'll come to that. So this wizened earth has never troubled us with hay. So it's a kind of he's kind of being facetious there. It's never troubled us with hay because the ground is so rocky and hostile. You can't grow crops. So it's never troubled us with hay. So as you see, there are no stacks or stocks that can be lost. Stacks or stocks here are piles of hay or wheat. So that can be lost. So he's saying because we've never been able to grow crops, it's not like we can lose it just because there's a storm. He's kind of looking at that silver lining. A kind of sarcastic, ironic tone. Nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. So this idea of if there were trees, and if a storm came, you might be able to hear the wind through the trees. And that might give you some kind of comfort, at least being able to hear the storm. But there are no trees. It's barren, it's too rocky. So there isn't even company when the storm is blowing at its fullest. And then it says, you know what I mean. Now here, that you know what I mean is an aside. It makes the poem sound very conversational. It makes it quite intimate, quite a personal poem. This is one person talking to another. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale so that you can listen to the thing you fear, forgetting that it pummels your house too. So a chorus is a group of singers, and normally that would be a positive thing, but it's not because it's a tragic chorus. So this storm is something that is something that they're used to, but and in some ways, in weird ways, it kind of brings them comfort to hear it, but they can't even hear it. So it's almost kind of building up to this invisible enemy, something that they can't hear, they can't see, because you can't see wind. You can see the effect of wind. So you could see the effect of wind blowing trees or blowing hay, but because there's no trees and no hay, you can't see the wind and you can't hear it. So it's this idea that it's a kind of invisible enemy. You know it's there. You know it pummels your house. This pummel verb is linked to violence and power, but there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to sit and you have to ride it out. So you fear it, but you know that there's nothing that you can do about it. And the fact that he uses your house creates that direct address. It involves the reader straight away. But there are no trees, no natural shelter. So again, this is a repetition in some ways, because it says that nor are there trees in 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth line, and then again here, but there are no trees. It's repeated. It's emphasizing the emptiness of the place, the barrenness. And imagine how tough you have to be to live in that kind of place. There is no natural shelter. So again, this is about human power versus nature. There is no natural shelter. They have had to build their houses into the rock. So a kind of maybe a conflict between the power of man and the power of nature. Again, using that direct address, you might think that the sea is company. So again, that kind of very intimate conversation that's going on between people, exploding comfortably down the cliffs. Now, that exploding comfortably is like an oxymoron. It explodes, which has ideas of power, anger, force, but it's comfortably. And that suggests that Mother Nature is very comfortable with attacking this island, with showing its violence, showing its force, and that the islanders are used to seeing it. It happens over and over, so there is a sense that nature is comfortable with it, but almost so is the community that has seen this many, many times before. And it says you might think that it's company. You might think that being able to watch the waves exploding on the cliffs might give you some kind of company, something to look at, but no. So that's very emphatic. It's a definite no. When it begins, so when this storm begins, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat turned savage. So here we have a simile of a cat, which is quite a placid, I guess, domestic creature. But when that storm starts, it's like it's turned savage. So that simile is comparing the strength and the savagery of the weather and the storm to a cat that has turned savage, an animal that turns savage, something that you might love and enjoy, like the ocean, can turn on you and it can pummel you. We just sit tight while wind dives and strafes invisibly. So that dives and strafes, they are terms that are used to describe an air attack. So a strafe is an attack where aircraft would fire or release bombs from, and salvo is also like a firing, a sudden discharge of guns in a battle. So here we have a semantic field of war. So dive, strafe, salvo, bombarded, these are all terms that we would use when we talk about war or a military force. So it's the idea that nature is waging war against the island, but also it's, if you think about it from a political term, it's this idea that the people of Northern Ireland know that this war is going to come. They know that these troubles that are brewing are going to erupt into violence. Space is a salvo. We are bombarded by the empty air. So again, if you're thinking about this from a political point of view, and you have those politicians who keep on talking, but their words are empty. So the stuff coming out of their mouth is just empty air. It doesn't change anything. They're not doing anything. Strange, it's a huge nothing that we fear. So again, this kind of oxymoron between nothing and fearing it, because obviously you wouldn't just fear nothing, but because you can't see the wind and you can't hear the wind, it is like a nothing. So that's really important to kind of think about both interpretations, and depending on what question you get in the exam, if it's to do with politics, you could look at this from a political interpretation. If it's anything to do with the power of nature, you could use the other interpretation, or you could use the idea of the human spirit versus nature. That would be another one that you could use, the storm, the literal storm interpretation. Okay, looking at the form and structure, and it is really important that you are analysing form and structure as well as just the language in poetry. The poem consists of 19 unrhymed lines, so it's mostly blank verse. So it has a kind of iambic meter to it. And that's the same as what Shakespeare has used if you think about Macbeth. And that pattern is very similar to human speech. So it's an ideal poem in which Heaney presents two people just talking to each other. But it does give it a really nice rhythm. But again, it's important that you understand that blank verse has a pattern similar to human speech. The use of present tense suggests that the islanders are doing what they've always done and what they will always do. This isn't something that's happened in the past. The storms will keep on coming, and therefore present tense makes it much more immediate. And the fact that there is only one stanza, it is solid. It's like the houses, it's built squat. There are no breaks, so that there's nothing for the wind to kind of come in and smash. It could also be representative or reflecting the communities standing together. So think about not just language, but how the form and the structure also help convey these main ideas in the poem. Okay, main ideas, themes, and issues that are explored in this poem. Certainly nature's power. As the storm gathers pace, the poem develops. At first, it's tragic, that tragic chorus, but then it becomes more explosive, it becomes more violent, and we have the semantic field of war coming in. So they're talking about that idea of being at the mercy of the storm's natural power. And I guess that kind of links into, if you're looking at this from a political interpretation, and the kind of ineffectiveness of political institutions. The people are at the mercy of the government. They can't really do anything but wait and see what happens. The other kind of themes, ideas, or issues might be the community and community spirit, that the idea of human spirits and the strength of community against the conflict. So, it talks about that using the collective pronoun we throughout. So it shows that they are preparing against the elements together as a community. So that idea that the human spirit may well be stronger than nature's power. They refuse to be broken by it. Okay, I'd like you to watch this quickfire revision just to refresh your memories about the poems if you're doing this in 2 sessions, and then answer questions 1 to 10. After you've answered questions 1 to 10, if you move on to the next slides, you will see that I've given you the answers, so you can check your answers. And then I would like you to do the extended writing task, the extended response. Write me 2 paragraphs and then send me the photo of your work so I can give you feedback to ensure that you've understood it. So watch this clip first and then have a go at answering the questions.